Martin, you gave a very rousing presentation about maybe shifting paradigms, shifting away from the idea of deficits to maybe, so instead of something that's deficit-oriented, let's talk about asset building. And with the post-it notes now, we're going to think about it a lot more. Frankie and Tina, your sharing was so honest and open, and it had me reflecting of my own role as a parent and a spouse. So with both your presentations, I actually was able to think about how it applied to me as an educator and a parent of a child with learning difficulties or differences. And I still have to reframe that, don't I, Martin? But and it just got me thinking about some of the experiences I've had. So as an educator, I often speak to the parents of children that I'm working with, and we often try to talk about the strengths that the child has. Oh, he's very enthusiastic. Do you know, today he was able to focus for a whole 45 minutes. So we try to bring across some of the positives. And I just remembered this one incident which has stayed with me. It's been like more than a decade since it happened. I had this student who would write passages. He was about 10 years old. He would write entire passages with invented spelling. So, I mean, you could not make it out. But I have a recording of it still, where I got him to read it back to me, and he could read every single word back to me. Yeah? Now, when I spoke to the parent, I brought this up and I said, look, he's got such a creative mind. He's thinking about such amazing things. And I remember it had the word ambulance, and ambulance was spelled different ways in different parts of that paragraph, but he read it as ambulance every single time. So I was gushing a little bit to the father, saying, this is amazing. And the father, with a look of despair, said, so what? And he said, he's not going to get anywhere. And interestingly, this was one of the rare occasions where it was a father I was talking to. I wasn't talking to a mum. And he said, so what? I mean, what is his future going to be like? And I mean, it did cause me to think about how we can help parents understand, because there is naturally an anxiety. I was also thinking about my experience as a parent, and I've shared this with some of our colleagues at the DAS. The first time I ever went for a parent-teacher meeting, right? So it's a few years ago. And I sat down all excited, and I was saying, okay, let's find out how my son's doing in school, right? And the teacher starts telling me, okay, he needs to work on this, he needs to work on that, he needs to work on this. And we only have 15 minutes typically. They've got so many students to see. And at the end of it, after she told me everything that I needed to work on for my son, I looked at her, I smiled, and I said, does he do anything well? And that kind of stumped her a little bit, because I think maybe no one's asked her that question, I'm not sure. And I remember her thinking a bit and going, oh, he's a very obedient boy, he's very respectful. And I said, okay, thank you very much, because time's run out. Me just sharing these experiences, of course, what we want to hear are your experiences. So maybe I could start with you, Martin. If you could tell me about your experiences growing up with, or tell us all, your experiences growing up with dyslexia and how it made you feel and maybe even changed the way you have approached your life.
Yeah, thank you. And that boy, I think it was a boy, I recognize him, and it was me, by the way. I used to spell the same word 3 or 4 different times on a page as well, and you can't read my handwriting, but I can. And I was the bottom of the class in almost everything. And I was held back a year twice throughout my school days. And a child knows how that feels. There's no child that doesn't realize it's humiliating or embarrassing. And that was me. And then I got a PhD. And the question is, what changed? What changed in me? And the answer is nothing. What changed was the way that I was being educated, and the way that people allowed me to express myself, and the way that people allowed me to learn, and allowed me to interact with others and interact with learning materials. That's what changed. And so when the father says, but what's he going to make of himself? Well, I'm not one of these people who likes, disability porn. The sort of, oh, look at this person, he made it even though, she made it even though. But there is something to be said for saying, well, I was that boy. I spelt everything badly 3 times. I couldn't spell. until I was about 17 when I got bored of not being able to spell, and I taught myself morphology. I wish I'd seen the presentation about morphology. Incredibly important way of teaching dyslexic kids to spell, by the way. I didn't realize what I was doing, but I taught myself morphology and became able to spell. And one of the things I say to schools, and this is really important, and it's something we can say to all our teachers. I mean, I give teacher training, and one of the things I say is we could teach like this, we could look at kids like that. And one of the things that teachers always say to me in response is, we'd love to, but it's too difficult. And I always turn to them and say, can you finish that sentence? And they say, what do you mean? And I say, it's too difficult for whom? And what they mean is it's too difficult for the teachers. And when education's about what's easier for the teachers rather than what's better for the children, we've got it upside down. We've inverted it. And so what we need to do is we need to think about allowing kids to learn and express themselves the way they're able to learn and express themselves. And then they won't simply be judged by what they can't do. Because what they can't do is always relative to a framework. And that framework is imposed. And it's inappropriate. And it's our job to change that inappropriate imposition. Guys.
Thank you, Martin. I mean, okay, so I think we agree with what Martin's saying, right? It's not about whether it's difficult for us, but really what's necessary for the individual. And I don't know if this is unique to Singapore. I suspect it's not, but academics play a huge part, and parents are highly anxious when they see struggles and they think, oh, I mean, some parents think way down the road and go like, what kind of job is he gonna get, years down the road. And I was just wondering, Tina, Frankie, as parents yourself, I mean, maybe you could share with us, and for the parents amongst us here as well, how did you first realize about these difficulties, and what kind of challenges did you encounter in trying to maybe get help, and maybe also how that made you feel as you were learning these things about your children?
Oh, they're very long and big questions.
I'll break it down.
No, don't worry. I think speaking on the point of view of parents, for sure, I think when you first receive a diagnosis, there's grief, there's shock, there's a sense of loss, and then that's what brings the tears, right? Because it's like, oh, what's my child going to do, in the future? Exactly that, that's a very parental orientation. We're always thinking about the future for our children. And I think the important thing is to journey day by day with your child. It's very raw, it's very real, but be willing to let them fail. Sometimes we're just, as Singaporean parents, unfortunately, we really want to bubble wrap our children and protect them from every single knock and bump and failure. But I would say, even on the hindsight, looking at my ADHD and dyslexic child's journey, John, he has faced a lot of natural failures, his natural limitations, and therefore he, like I said, he almost got dropped out of school. The school counter-offered to allow him to continue, but dropped some subjects and then later leave the program at the year 4 because he was actually in a 6-year program. But with that, he was able to go to Polytechnic. So each step of the journey that way, even though it was through failure and a horribly, seemingly embarrassing, being held back a year kind of situation, leaving his school when his friends were going on to 6 years, it actually helped guide him where his strengths were. And he ended up taking a diploma in game art and design because he's very good at digital art. But he had gotten into this art school, which actually was not so much just on his drawing. It was a lot of other exposure which exhausted him. And he kept saying, he complained to the VP at the year 2, at the meet the teacher, because he also almost failed again, and said, I have no time to enjoy my drawing. And, sort of a bit like complaining out loud. And she looked at him and sort of said, yeah, well, you sort of want to almost like telling him, maybe this place is not for you. I was like, Aiyo. Anyway, okay. She was a friend, actually, but she just all meant well because he was so loud and eloquent, right? I think she also got a shock. But actually that is his discovery journey, that journey of failing, of not meeting standards. So yes, I understand about us being very, strengths and inclusive and all that, but the child themselves know there's something not quite right. I'm not fitting in, I'm not, meeting standards, but actually it guides them in like, hey, where are my strengths? And what then actually, can I actually do better than others or just the best that I can? And now he's crafted, thankfully, he's graduated with a diploma. And he told me, I don't want to be in any job situation that I have to take medication. Or that, and that's such an idealistic, concept, because he hates the side effects of it. And he doesn't want to do a uni degree because he can't think of what will benefit him, but he has ideas for what kind of work he wants to do. So all this is a journey of discovery through the failures, through facing the, not very accommodating environments, and also then telling himself, I'm not going to go into a non-accommodating environment if that's my uni course, just for the sake of getting a degree, right? But I think for us as parents to journey to this stage where we are comfortable with it, where we can support him and not panic like, oh, my son doesn't want to do a degree, right? Or, oh, my son doesn't want to, do this or that. Or, this kind of job cannot earn money, all of that has so much letting go, putting aside, breathing, and looking at him and seeing where he is and what he needs, Yeah.
Yeah, I think for us, what's helpful is we are very aligned with regards to how the life trajectory for our children would be. We don't necessarily draw a linear trajectory, assuming that if you go to a good primary school, means higher chance of you going to a good secondary school and therefore a good JC, a good uni, and a good job, and happily ever after. So we don't draw that trajectory. So we are very comfortable to send John and all our boys to a neighborhood school because nearness is important in primary school because it's time efficient, right? We don't need to aim for a branded school. Like in Singapore, there are many parents here, right? Many would actually move near to a school that is so-called more branded so that you can get your children in there. We were totally aligned that we did not do that. Go to a school nearby, let your child enjoy childhood. Don't restrict him, don't box him up. And then subsequently, whichever secondary school that you go to is up to his or her standard, something that's optimal for him. I think parents need to be more comfortable with their approach. Then I think you'll make the government's job easier. Because now it's very difficult. If government tell the schools to be more relaxed, parents will get too anxious, and then you start to get more supplementary papers for your children to stretch them even more. So I think that approach is really helpful for us. I think this is one of the key that many parents cannot get their head over. So we are totally not concerned about performance, about grades. We don't send our kids for tuition. We talk to them. Is it okay? And they are perfectly fine. They just want to enjoy their childhood. After school, they go to the library. They borrow other books. They learn other things. And it's so nice to watch them learn, in life, rather than just stick to that few subjects that you do in school, right? You already spend 8 hours in school learning those few subjects, and then in the evening you come back, you tuition the same subjects. Weekend, you tuition the same subjects again. So I think we, as parents, we need to start from ourselves. Then the society will change. So that really helped in terms of us coping with John. We're not fearful that if he fails. There's a lot of safety nets now in Singapore, to be honest. Even if you don't make it in PSLE, somehow later on you can still come back to the system again. I think we need to have that confidence. So that's our experience with John. He fell out from SOTA. At that stage, he would either go to ITE, he would go to early NS, he would go to poly, and the poly is so flexible now. He doesn't even need to go through the normal admission exercise. He knocked on the doors and asked them for an interview. And based on an aptitude interview, they recruited him.
Wow.
Yes, so that's the confidence that we need to have. And it's amazing that Singapore has progressed a lot more than what most of us would think. We always assume that MOE is very restrictive, government is very restrictive. Actually, the government is waiting for parents to be a bit more open. They need the parents to work with them, to really make education a lot more palatable, less stressful. And I think that can be done. Yeah, that can be done. And that's what we have experienced. And honestly, when John was in poly, he struggled, even though he got a diploma, but he nearly didn't make it from day one. Every day is a struggle for him. But thankfully, we are very much aligned. We are not fearful. We are not anxious. Even if he doesn't make it, there will be another way out for him. So we are always more concerned about his overall well-being rather than performance, rather than grades. Because that idea is actually not correct. Because we assume that you have good grades means the next step, the next trajectory will be better for you, but not necessary. Yes, so we need to look at the overall character development and the well-being, and somehow our children would be able to find a way out, knowing that even with diverse special needs, they have a lot of giftings, a lot of avenues for them to channel their joy, their energy, that will bring about a lot more well-being for them for the rest of their lives.
Thank you, Frankie, Tina. It's just, again, I'm just thinking of, oh, yes, please. Again, just thinking about some of the experiences I have had as a parent, and I'm picking up on some things, and let me know if I've got you correct. Like you mentioned that there's life outside of the classroom, right? And again, it reminds me of a story, and these are lessons I've learned, and thankfully, came out better for it. When my child, who has a learning difficulty, was in preschool, and of course at that time, it's not diagnosed, right? And we went for another parent-teacher meeting, and I was told, and she's like maybe 4 or 5 at that time, and she said, she needs to go and attend extra classes. A lot of her classmates, you're talking about preschoolers, yeah? A lot of her classmates are going for reading classes and writing classes, and coming from a, both parents working household, she was in full day daycare. And I was like, but I only see her for a few hours on weekdays, and the weekends are for us to go to the beach. And the parent specifically used the term, she is being neglected, which I took offense with, of course. But it's interesting what you say, because I absolutely agree with you. And that's what we also tell a lot of parents when we meet them during parent-teacher meetings, when we see the child. And sometimes the parents will say, you know what, let me take him out of soccer and send him for additional remedial programs. And we will say, no, that gives him joy, especially so if he meets success that way, let him experience that success and that joy. And so, that I think is a very important message. We've got to know how to sort of moderate expectations, and we may need to take a step back and allow the child to express themselves in what areas they want to flourish, and in what areas when they are struggling, we're there to support them. And Tina, from what you were saying, I picked up on maybe this notion of us not so much mollycoddling, but being too careful to make sure that our children don't experience too many difficulties, and through that, perhaps they build this sense of resilience and independence. But you can correct me if I've misunderstood. But, while we are having these wonderful conversations, I know you've got some questions for our panelists. So I'm going to post the first one, right, because I don't want to miss out on this. So this person says, hello, I love the idea of changing the language we use to refer to dyslexia, as it tries to change the perception of dyslexia at a societal and individual level. My question is, how can we change the language neurotypical students use to refer to their classmates who have dyslexia? For example, on social media platforms like TikTok, there is a trend to refer to individuals with autism as acoustic. I did not know this. I'm obviously way behind on my social media knowledge, but yeah. Okay, so there's a trend to refer to individuals with autism as acoustic as a way to mock and joke about their condition. So do you think young people require more critical thinking skills to think deeper about the impact of the language they use?
No. Okay, on the one hand, yes. The critical thinking is always good. I'm a philosopher at heart, and the heart of philosophy is critical thinking. When I said no, I meant something. The way to change people's perceptions of that which is different is to stop it from being different. And the way to do that is to help people understand each other. But more than understanding, because that's the cognitive thing, we need to help kids learn to love each other. And the way we help them learn to love each other is by helping them get to know each other on a personal level. It's the teacher's primary duty, especially in primary school, is the teacher's primary duty to bring together a positive learning environment. And that includes bringing kids together so that they understand each other and they empathize with each other. Now, a very quick bit of science for those who don't know the research. There's something called mirror neurons. You might have heard of them, you might not have heard of them, but essentially a mirror neuron is something in your brain that does the same thing as the same thing that's doing it in the brain of the person that you're close to. And this is what they call, this is one of the reasons they think we have empathy. And the way to bring about the firing of the mirror neurons is to get people to experience the same things and to bring them together so they know each other and they care for each other and they have this sort of this sympathetic leading to empathetic relationship. It's the teacher's job to do this, to bring the kids together so that they understand each other on a personal level, so that they love each other, so that we don't teach them that this is what dyslexia is. We help them understand this is what this person is. This is who this person is. This is what this person needs. This is the needs of your children, the needs of my child. My child's autistic. He's now homeschooling because it just wasn't appropriate for him in a schooling environment. And I'm quite thankful for this. Thank goodness he's homeschooling. And one of the reasons is that there was an atmosphere in this school of competitiveness, of kids not getting on with each other. And that's the fault of the leaders, of the teachers, of the school environment. And so it's the primary job of the primary school teacher to help the kids love each other, to help them get to know each other, to help them understand each other on a heart level rather than on a head level. And that's the route I go down in answer to that question, if that's okay.
Thank you, thank you. Frankie, Tina, would you, a comment on referring to children with or individuals with autism as acoustic, which I suppose is derogative, So how do you?
I think it's interesting because in a similar way, on the social media trend, adults who realize that they are autistic or ADHD as they are older, they are actually owning it. They like to be called autistic. They say, don't say I'm an autistic person. Okay, so hear this, because we are all the parents and educators. We always say don't use the first person language. Don't say this person is autistic, right? Because that's rude. So we learn to say this person with autism. But the young people who are actually later diagnosis, this was a trend about maybe 2-3 years ago during COVID. I was watching a lot of this. And they were all saying, autism is a part of me. If you say I am a person with autism, it's like you're saying I have a disease or I have a condition. But I am fully autistic. So they were really owning that condition and saying hey, I'm okay, I'm autistic. So it was very interesting because I'm still doing educator talks and we do all this and the parents are all cannot say autistic person, ADHD. Actually, that's so much faster to type actually. but I was telling them, but the young people are okay. They are learning to say, I'm proud of it. So it's interesting that in a negative word that we view, they are actually owning it and then it becomes positive. So I totally get what Martin's also saying, where it's the heart of it and it's also how they portray themselves. And it's true that these people are actually giving a voice to the positive side of autism and ADHD. They're saying, hey, these are the way I am, and it's just like that, I'm a fish out of water, like all of you are other things, well, but who cares? This is me. And people find it funny, they laugh about it, but it's actually giving more visibility to how they do feel like misfits, and yet at the same time, they don't mind calling themselves different because they know they're different. So I think it's really just all of us learning to live with one another without having to label each other. So when I go to schools and do assembly talks, recently I brought 2 young men with me I'm not the only one talking because when it's assembly talk, you talk to the students, right? So they don't want to hear an auntie or a mother talking. They hear that all the time with educators. But So I bring these two young people. I went to a boys' school, and then this boys' school was so scared. You know, I mean, like they kept telling me, like, please it's okay if the boys are very rowdy, and apologizing in advance, and telling my two speakers that, you know, also that they're so afraid because that the boys will just go chaotic, because they often do that during assembly talk. And I was like, oh no, don't worry, we're all okay. And even the two young guys, they're also ADHD, right? So they're like, oh, we're okay. But amazingly, the hall was quiet. They really listened to these two men, young men, talking about their ADHD experience. And even the teachers were shocked at the end of it. And they were like walking out with me and like, wow, that's quite amazing, right? Like, because they have made such a ruckus before that speakers have walked out. Like assembly talk speakers have walked out of the hall.
Wow.
Yeah, because they couldn't control the crowd. And sometimes the principal would stand right in the front, crossing his arms and looking at the boys. And the speaker's like on the stage, but he's like there, just to like, you know, keep quiet kind of thing. Yeah, so, and the questions that they asked after that was directly like that. What's the difference between ADHD and autism? You know, you know, what if my friend has is autistic? What do I do? You know, that kind of thing. So they were genuinely asking, and they weren't mocking, you know, interestingly. Sometimes some questions you can tell they asked like just to make a fool, but they weren't. So young people you know, this new generation, they are willing to talk about mental health struggles, even all these special needs, and just talk about it, like just say it, the word. You don't, I mean, they may fool around with it sometimes and call their friends, like in boys' school, my son will tell me, the one with anxiety, he will say that they always joke about people being autistic and all that, and then they will laugh and everything, but they're actually okay. Like they don't say to the one who actually has it lah. You know, they just say it as a joke, you know. So anyway, they know me, they're always like, you know, it's okay, we're not bullying him, you know. I think we need to be more direct and really just heartfelt, you know, like, hey, what do you really mean? And hey, if you are bullying, then you please own it too lah, you know. But if you're not, then what do you know about autism or ADHD? Do you know enough to be a friend, you know, to care? Yeah, so the language, all that, it's really housed in the generation too, I think. Yeah.
Frankie, would you like to add to that?
No, I guess the other thing to mention is also for John, right? He noticed that a lot of his friends, they are on the spectrum, but they're obviously not aware, or their parents are not aware, or don't want to know. So he would come back and tell us, hey, Mom and Dad, can you go and tell this so-and-so parent? I think the child has it. Like Tina said, right, they are very open and they want more of their peers, and they can see and they can tell. Like John is so well trained by us, he knows his condition, right? So he is very empathetic and he wants to help his friends who have similar conditions to him, but yet his friends are ignorant about it. So he's also very frustrated.
Right. But so this peer engagement, peer support, trying to get people to understand peers, right, is actually helpful, both for those who don't have the issues and even those who might be at risk. They get to understand and empathize with each other, and they become more tolerant as a classroom community or as a school community, right? So, I mean, related to what you were just saying, Frankie, there's another question here. I thought this was the best time for me to bring this up. Let me find that question. So we talked about being open, and we talked about calling it what it is, right? Owning it and not tiptoeing around the issue. I had a conversation with someone from PETOS who was telling me, you know, all the decisions that are being made about dyslexic person versus people with dyslexia are being made by those who don't have the challenge, you know. Yeah. We should allow ourselves to name ourselves. And he being dyslexic was saying, I am happy to go around saying I'm dyslexic. The question is offending the non-dyslexic group, right? We seem to be more offended by that than others. So, I mean, is that really a reasonable thing for us to expect, for us to want to change things for individuals who are fine with being called what, however they would like to be called?
I think we just need more education, you know? Like, so I go around and tell parents, I keep saying that, hey, you know, it's okay because I say this, because I am guided by the young people themselves. They don't want to be called a person with blah, blah, blah. you know, and they go, oh, okay. So it takes a long time, like we are the ones that are the old fogies now. A bit need that cognitive flexibility too. So let's challenge ourselves. Okay, sorry, there's a lot of young people here too, the young EdTs. It really is just like figuring out. But I guess for Singapore, we won't know like percentages, right? Like how many people are really aware, how many people are not, how many want to be called, you know, as it is, or how many still want to be called a person with. So we could do a survey, maybe someone wants to do that, and then we can all be informed. But then again, you know, is a majority the one that's necessarily the right way to go? Yeah, rather than looking at the one that's more enlightened, and then maybe we should create that to be the majority, right? Similar to, like, say, changing language. If we really get people to understand, you know, the heart of the difference, that it's just a difference, just like someone has a different, like, dietary concern, and then you have a different learning approach and a different thinking way, then can we just not embrace everyone, right? In all inclusive, that's true inclusiveness, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
But I think more importantly is, like, these are small nuances, right? More importantly is, I think they wouldn't want to be labeled as naughty, stupid, poor attitude, so on and so forth. So rather than, you know, too worried about all those nuances, the important thing is really understand the issue at hand. Yeah, I think many people are still fighting with not knowing the issue or not recognizing the issue. Then they will get labeled other things that are not appropriate for them.
Right.
You know, get called being naughty,
Lazy,
poor attitude, just not putting in enough effort. I think those are worse. Those labels are a lot worse.
Absolutely, yes. So it's all about education, raising awareness, advocacy, work that all of us, especially the three of you, are heavily involved in. So I'm going to take you to another question. Maybe, Martin, you can start us off with this one. What are some of the most effective teaching strategies you have encountered or developed for individuals? Effective teaching strategies.
So effective teaching strategies. It depends what we're teaching, of course. I mentioned earlier morphological awareness is a wonderful way of teaching spelling and reading, and a number of different parts of reading as well. So morphological awareness. It turns out, by the way, that those with dyslexia, or those who are dyslexic, depending on how they like to call themselves, us, we actually gain more meaning from understanding morphology than non-dyslexics. This is really interesting. So where we teach kids about the morphological makeup of a word, those of us who are dyslexic, those of us who are dyslexic tend to understand more meaning when we understand this. It also teaches us, it allows us to read faster, it allows us to read more fluently, and it allows what they call predictive reading. So for instance, if I haven't read a word before, and I come across this new word, and I understand morphology, it allows me to read that in ways that simply teaching phonological decoding doesn't, for instance, or sight word memory, or something along those lines. It also teaches us to be able to spell, and predictive spelling, and word creation. Years ago, I wanted to be a writer. When I found out I could spell, when I taught myself to spell, I thought, I'm going to write novels. They were terrible, by the way. I don't know if anyone's ever heard of... has anyone ever heard of Beatrix Potter, the Peter Rabbit book? Yes. Yeah, well, I decided that Peter Rabbit and Jemima Puddleduck and these people, when they were kids, they were naughty boys and girls. So clearly, when they grow up, they'd be gangsters and pirates. And I wrote stories about Peter Rabbit as a gangster, and Jemima Puddleduck was a pirate, and they kidnapped, I think, Miss Tiggywinkle or something like that, and Mr. McGregor was after them.
Still children's stories?
They were children. No, they were grown-up stories, but they were comedies, you know, right. and lots of custard pie fights and stuff. And I wanted to come up with a word, because I talked about a number of rabbits a number of times, and I wanted to come up with a word for of the same species. And I thought, okay, so let's just do this. Let's piece the words together. And I made up a word, congeneric. And then I found out it existed. And it's that kind of thing that teaching morphology can help us do. And this is a fascinating thing. So it allows us to learn to It allows us to understand meaning. It allows faster reading, more fluent reading, better comprehension, predictive reading, predictive spelling. It's a fantastic thing for kids to do. And when you were doing it, by the way, a great way of doing it is to break down the different morphemes into colours. So you have the root words in one colour, you have the prefixes and the suffixes in different colours, and then you maybe have magnetic strips. And you can put them on a board, and you can play around with the magnetic strips on the board. If you don't have magnetic strips, there are websites that allow you to do this and play around with them online. So, so as not to take up too much time, I think one thing that I think is really useful is morphology. Also, very quickly, a couple of people might know, I invented a card game. There's a card game called Top Trumps. I don't know if you know what Top Trumps is, but essentially, often for superheroes or something. And so you've got Spider-Man, and Spider-Man's strength is 6. And Superman's strength would be 10, so Superman would beat Spider-Man.
Oh.
And then you've got Spider-Man's, I don't know, Spider-Man's social ability is 12, and Superman's social ability is 3. So, you know, Spider-Man beats Superman, and you play them off against each other. I invented a game called Phonological Top Trumps, where you take words, and then it's got, this word has got how many letters the word has, and it's got how many syllables the word has, and it's got how many morphemes the word has, and it's got how many stresses the word has. And you can get kids to play with each other using phonological top trumps. And whenever they say, okay, this word has got 3 stresses, they read out the word. I'm trying to think of a word with 3 stresses now, but let's imagine Singapore. They read it out, and then they tap each stress, Singapore. And so you get them to read and tap, and they play against each other, and it really helps develop phonological awareness, and it's a really fun way of doing it. You can create your own cards, or I created them, and you can buy me off them at cost price. I don't make a profit off them. It's about $5 for a box, so don't worry about it. But these are 2 little things that I find really work.
And for Tina and Frankie, was there any particular strategy that worked for, say, John, that you would like to share with the audience?
I think for him, I just wanted to sort of move on a bit with the morphology in his dyslexia. Sure. He picked up reading really quickly. He had a 1-to-1 remedial at that time. I didn't come into DAS because I was desperate. He was already K2. So I ended up having a friend who knows OG, so she taught him 1-to-1. But I just wanted to share about how good morphology is. That he's very keenly interested in logos and words nowadays. Like, my boys remember like the old logo of something and a new logo, and then they will walk around and critique all the logos, and especially John, the one who understands the letters and all that. And he will always have some comment about the way they write the letter and all that. And it's so interesting because when we walk, we just assume we can read it, But to him, he's like, why did they do that? Like, why did they put the letter this way? Or why did they, and it's just fun. So this is nothing to do with answering the question, but...
No. Similarly, my daughter takes issue with, and I don't know if I can say this, so please don't be offended, but the way school is spelt in a particular preschool, right? And it's spelt with a K instead of a CH, and she's like, why did they do that? I mean, that's not correct, but it's interesting. Please go ahead. Yeah.
Yeah, no. So recently, because I had to, I'm setting up a training social enterprise on my own to house all the training that I'm doing. So I was working with him to design my logo. So it's been really fun, just listening to him, and he'll advise me about, what kind of fonts I want or what kind of size. And then we were even looking at the open dyslexic font and whether I want to use that, and how do I want to depict my thing. So it's been really nice, engaging him on that level and seeing and hearing him in all the content knowledge that he's gained over the years, as well as to do with spelling. And so we figured that, my logo, I haven't released it yet, so your akan datang, that means coming soon. We realized that using small letters just somehow fits the logo that he designed, But then small letters are actually not as dyslexia friendly, right? So then we have to think, okay, maybe we should make it weighted and all sorts of things. So it was really nice in terms of just activating that part of his knowledge. and working together towards, something that would benefit me, in that sense. Yeah, so it's nice. I'm not answering your question again. Sorry.
But still, it's a great conversation to have. Martin, go ahead.
Yeah, I mean,
Sorry, Frankie.
When he was young, we can advocate for him when he's around us, but when he's not around us, somebody else got to advocate for him, right? So in primary school, we used to gather all his teachers together at the start of the year, just to inform his teachers, give the teachers a summary of John's condition, to equip them, and honestly, all the teachers are always very appreciative. So then in school, the teachers can be his advocate. The teachers can watch out for him with the right lens. Otherwise, he would obviously get into trouble every other day, right? Either with his peers or with his attitude and all that. So that helps. So we did that throughout his primary school years. Then when he came to secondary school as a teen, we would discuss with him, now you're old enough, you can explain yourself. Would you want to try being your own advocate? That means he would try explaining to his teachers, and we told him that whenever you feel that you can't do it anymore or you can't explain yourself, then we will then be your next line of call. So we offered that to him. Yeah, so that's how we have sort of gradually helped him over time. That's why the diagnosis, the knowledge is so important, right? As parents, if we are not even sure of the issues that our child is facing, it's difficult for us to explain on his behalf. Yeah. So for parents who are here, right? Yeah, the important thing for you to equip yourself is, like I said, not just to send your child out for intervention, but you need to advocate for him. You need to be able to explain why is he behaving or responding in this way, and get others around him to do that. Yeah. So we are thankful that teachers are open, at every level. Even in secondary school, when he was in SOTA, obviously he was recruited into SOTA because of his creative skill, but eventually he has to exit because he couldn't cope with the academic rigor, and the school was very cooperative to work with us to transit him out. And even in Nanyang Poly, we had to negotiate with the lecturer to help turn his industry internship back to school, because we live in the East in Tampines, and he was meant to be posted to NTU for his internship. Oh. Can you imagine having to travel almost 2 hours each way? So knowing that, straight away he told us it will not work out. He will freak him out. Yeah, he will basically melt down every day. Yeah, so we discussed with the school, and they made a special arrangement to allow him to have the similar experience, but instead of being posted out to the industry, you do it within the polytechnic itself in another department. Yeah, so these are things that can be arranged. Yes, we just need to be able to articulate it, rationalize it, and that's the flexibility that we have in the system to help us manage, and guide our children.
Right. So Frankie, what I'm hearing is that giving him the power to be his own advocate is one of the biggest things we can do it's helped John, and also for anyone else who's going through a similar experience.
Yes.
Giving him that knowledge and that power.
Giving him that knowledge. You need to train him up. Yeah, get him to know his condition better and better over time.
Right.
Because it will be very frustrating for him if he cannot explain himself.
Yes.
Yeah.
And as they get older, I think the people around them would be expecting him to be able to explain himself, right? And at that point, coming to somebody else and saying, "Can you speak on my behalf? Can you explain this?" It's really not helpful for him. And Tina, you mentioned about dyslexia phone. The verdict's not out on that one. It's a little bit mixed, I think. But yes, all the best with that design. Going back to some of the questions that you guys have posted. All right, this one. My son was diagnosed with dyslexia and attended DS intervention classes from P5 till Sec 4. When he continued his studies in Republic Poly, his grades were just passing. We know that he struggled, self-esteem, few friends, etc. No one from the Poly knew that he is dyslexic. He graduated with a diploma, completed NS. I am just wondering if there's a need to reveal his condition to mitigate the struggles he had faced. I'm, of course, wondering why no one in the Poly knew he's dyslexic. And my personal opinion there is, yes, the disclosure rates at tertiary levels are quite poor. And often, I think it's because it really depends on whether the faculty and the school has a support system that the individual feels he or she can access. I think it's also they're also at an age where perhaps they want to fit in more than stand out. So these are some of the things we've observed. But coming back to the question that was posted, is there a need to reveal his condition to mitigate the struggles he has faced? Any thoughts on that?
I think interestingly, when I work with adults with ADHD and multiple needs, some of them dyslexia or autism, it is a very real concern that the lack of awareness on the corporate level does render those who are applying for jobs or even at the workplace who then receive a diagnosis, it makes them feel very apprehensive about revealing their diagnosis to their peers and their reporting officers or their bosses. Yeah, so it is a real thing, but I think along the lines of what we've been sharing, it's so important for you to have that real conversation with your son about his dyslexia, the implications, the effects, the challenges that he feels he's facing, and what kind of support does he think he needs in the working environment, in the world after NS, right? Because that's where he then would know how to advocate for himself, or whether he wants to advocate for himself. It is true that dyslexia alone, the fact that you're asking this question, and probably for him, is already testament to the fact that a lot of people view dyslexia as very academic based. And therefore you've gone through remediation, so you're pretty okay, you're doing all right, so now it's settled, right? And the rest of life and all that, it shouldn't affect you anymore, so to speak, right? But because it's a literacy thing, and also there are a lot of co-occurring challenges. It is linked to how the brain perceives, right? Morphology and all of that. So you never know in what situation your son might find himself, whether it is in managing other people, so not even just reading language, managing documents and visual presentations, that he may suddenly feel challenged or that he needs some extra support. So that's where he does not necessarily need to say, I am dyslexic, I need support. But he needs to be able to say that, hey, I'm not so great with the PowerPoint thing, like, should I put the words here or there? Or, every time I'm doing a PowerPoint, I prefer if someone else were to run through one time for me. There's nothing wrong, right? We all need to learn how to ask for help in the workplace. So that's what we also mean by advocacy. You don't have to say the thing. You just have to list your constraints and say, hey, I'm really good at this part. You all don't like to do that part, right? Hey, I do lah, But can someone else do this thing? Like, for example, editing the boss's speech, right? Which he will die. And then he'll cannot sleep whole night. But someone else might be like, just do it on the fling, right? In the bus, look at it and then can edit. So that's where he needs to know how to, in that sense, reveal it appropriately, maybe more according to the need or just what it entails, rather than saying, I'm dyslexic, because no one will really know what you mean anyway when you say, I'm dyslexic, so, okay, so are you looking for compassion? Or like what? Or do you not want to type anything forever? You cannot email us? It's like they don't know what you mean. So he needs to know what he wants to say. And then he needs to be confident and comfortable to say it. So one of the things that when Frankie was talking about how we coach our son was helping him know that he can come to us to ask anytime as well. So during especially the poly time when he was going through all these considerations for the internship, he would tell us, he would say, Dad, Mom, I need to talk to you about something. Or I need to ask you, the school asked me about this thing, what do I do? How do I answer him? Then them. And I said, oh, so how did you answer? I said, oh, I told them to discuss with my parents. Yeah. They were like, oh, okay. Because this one was specifically to do with the internship. So actually, for your information, polytechnics all have a group. I forgot. I keep forgetting the name because my son didn't access it that much. But they do have like special education needs kind of a office.
The disability support office, right?
Thank you. Yes. I don't know. Okay. Yeah. Maybe. Probably. So then they have like a mentor assigned to them. But oftentimes because there's no it's not like extra time, and some of them, like even my son's course, there's no exam even. So accommodations are a bit like ambiguous. There's actually no accommodation, not even ambiguous. So they don't even know how to support my son, we also don't know what to ask for, in that way. So that's what I meant when sometimes when it's specific, then my son knew how to say, hey, we need to discuss. And then we'll discuss, and he'll go back and tell the lecturer, and then later he's not very satisfied, he'll come again and we'll say, okay, why don't we have a Zoom meeting, right? And then, so we actually coached him in those steps where he needs. And the interesting thing that we found out in that journey was, okay, there was one incident where he told off the lecturer in a WhatsApp group, okay? Yeah, so it's one of those, a bit of social communication thing, and, you know, a bit of like over-enthusiastic, you know, so nothing to do with his internship or what, this is just another example. He felt that this lecturer is a little bit like, everyone is frustrated with this lecturer for certain reasons, okay? So there was one day they were trying to wait for some answer and it was not clear, so he was very upset. So he went to like blast the lecturer in the group chat with everyone there. And the way he said it was like, everyone thinks you like that, you know, kind of, like not just saying for myself, I say for everybody else kind of thing. And then after that, he didn't realize, because a lot of classmates, I mean, I guess to protect themselves too, they all jumped at him and saying, how can you say that? How can you claim that we also say that? And blah, blah, blah. But he was shocked because he genuinely thought everyone also felt the same way as him.
And he knew that everyone felt that way.
Yes, yeah. Because they all complained about
That's
the teacher.
Right, yeah.
So anyway, long the short, he really came out quite shaken, like literal, I was going to bed already, he came out shaken and like, oh dear, you know, I don't know what I did, and you know, because all the messages were furiously coming in. And thankfully there was someone nice that actually reached out to him separately and said, hey, cannot like that, you cannot say like that and all that, you know. But he was just so shaken, he didn't know he did a wrong thing. So why I tell this story is because that same lecturer was the one overseeing his internship. And so after some back and forth, and he was really nice, you know, and during one of the Zoom meetings, he actually told us, and John was in the room, I think, he said that, you know, he realizes that John does have his constraints, but when he is speaking in person, he's a whole lot more clearer. And actually, he is very respectful, and it comes across, we understand his point. But when he communicates in text, which I guess he was referring to this one historic incident, or probably more than that one incident, you know, people might get offended. Yeah. So that lecturer was actually being very nice. And that was, I think, the cause of him also telling us, do you want to reveal to the company that your son has special needs? So that started that whole conversation. And in the end, because of various things, he did it in-house, right, NYP. So him knowing that and learning that he didn't know how to communicate like on written, and he could be highly misunderstood. Not say didn't know but could be misunderstood. It's something he needs to take into the corporate world too. Like we had to reaffirm him and say, hey, your lecturer actually understands you when you talk to him face to face. And he assures him that, yeah, actually John is very respectful. There's nothing, you know, of issue. In fact, they were also like not sure how to advise us, like whether to say he has an issue or not. You know, because they feel that he doesn't usually have issues, like, you know, except for probably this one episode. So all he can take is one episode, right, in a corporate setting, and he will get marked down. Yeah. So I appreciate that whole journey, because in the end, who is the one that's supposed to learn? Is John. He has to learn that, hey, maybe if I really don't know how to, you know, or I'm not happy, let me go and talk face to face with my boss, because I'll probably get a better outcome than just worrying, texting, and then like being afraid that I like, you know, started a bomb or something, you know.
Right.
Yeah.
Frankie? Yes?
I mean, just to extend on what Tina shared, it's really back to the needs that John requires. Yeah, so it's important to be able to articulate your needs so that you know how not to do things that is beyond what you can cope. Yeah, so in this case, you know, when we discuss with the lecturer, we learn a lot more as well. So the lecturer will tell us that in the field of this digital field, right, there's a lot more demand than supply. So if you do a blanket declaration that John is ADHD, ASD, and dyslexic, he may not even get a chance to get an internship, so to speak. Yeah, so the internship that is selected for him to go to NTU is actually an employer that the school is aware of, that is very compassionate, you know, with individuals who have diverse needs.
Right.
So that's why he chose that particular industry, that particular employer for him. Right. But unfortunately, the distance is just too far, and knowing John's condition, he just couldn't cope. Right. So that all this discussion is really useful to be able to go back and forth. Yeah. For me as an employer, if I were to interview and hire staff, I would rather the staff is self-aware. If you have diverse needs and you could declare to me, I would be a lot more open and know that you really know yourself, and I'll welcome you even more, rather than I see that you have needs, but you are trying to skirt around and not to tell me.
Right. So from an employer's perspective, what you're saying is, and obviously I'm assuming it's about employment, this question, because he's completed his NS. From an employer's perspective, what you're saying is let's be transparent. And
yes.
Not that your expectations as far as your work outcomes are compromised, but rather accommodations in order for you to achieve your expectations are then, in
Exactly.
your mind.
Because I'm aware and I can see that there are many people walking around with needs, but they just cannot explain themselves. That's worse. Yeah, it's not something that is rare. It's actually quite common. It's more common than what most of us would think.
Yeah. And honestly, isn't that the way we should all operate, right? We should all be tapping on our strengths and then collaborating in that way.
Yes.
Yep.
And I have a friend who is a CEO of a company. He has multiple needs, and he knows that certain things he just can't touch. He will never touch the books. He will never touch the finances. So you need to get very capable people to work alongside him, to advise him, to mentor him, to cover his back.
Right.
And that's because he understands his needs.
Exactly, yes. So again, we come back to the whole idea of knowing who you are, knowing what your strengths are, and being able to speak to that. So Martin, to disclose or not to disclose? It almost sounds like a philosophical
here's a great question. And yeah, I know, that is the question. Here's a really interesting, let's have a straw poll, okay? Based on what we've just heard. How many people think that employers, that is the bosses, want their employees to disclose whether they have a neurodivergent modality? I call it modality. How many people think? So raise your hand if you think the majority of employers would rather their employees or their prospective employees disclosed. Great. Okay, now raise your hands whether you think the majority of job applicants want to disclose. This is really interesting. It turns out, so I've been involved in a project that runs through 6 or 7, depending on how you look at it, because Belgium is kind of 2 countries. 6 or 7 countries in Europe. It's got sort of the French speaking and So I've been involved in a project that runs through 6 or 7 countries in Europe. And one of the things we've been trying to do is work out pathways for autistic people to find and sustain long-term fulfilling employment. Not just funnel them into jobs, but find ways for them to sustain long-term fulfilling employment. And one of the things we did is we ran focus groups and interviews among vocational schools, employment providers, employers, and autistic job seekers. And one of the really interesting things we found, and it really relates to what you were saying, is that the employers want people to disclose. But the people who are looking for the jobs are too scared to disclose because they think it's going to bring about prejudice against them. Now, this is fascinating. Once we know this, then we can start to do something about it. We can start to open up the conversation. Have people have employers say, look, if you'd like to disclose, we're really open to that. So allow people that space to be able to disclose. And this is a fascinating thing because it allows then autistic and by extension dyslexic and ADHD job seekers to be open about who they are. And I find that I work with a number of companies. The ones I work with and the ones I'm happiest with are the ones who know I'm dyslexic, the ones who know I have ADHD, the ones who know I'm an idiot. They're the ones who are happy with me anyway, and it's a really important thing. And something else, there was another part to the question. I remember earlier, at the beginning, this part was the mental health needs. There sort of emotional needs, emotional... well, we know that neurodivergent people, self-esteem, we know that those of us who are neurodivergent, on the one hand, there have been studies done. They've wired us up. They've clipped crocodile clips all over us and wired us up. And it turns out that we neurodivergent people, especially dyslexics, by the way, we feel more. We are more emotionally sensitive to emotional stimuli than if you like, neurotypical people, whatever neurotypical means. And on the other hand, we also, let's be honest, we have challenges with emotional regulation. So we feel more, but we can regulate it less. And this is one of the challenges that we have. And so the ability to be able to name emotions, to be able to understand these emotions, possibly reframe these emotions, this is a really important thing for us. And it's something that we can do together. It's never something that you do alone. Because this is a lonely place, being alone. We all know that. And when you're alone, your emotions are not terribly good a lot of the time. And so the two parts of this are, on the one hand, we know that the employees, as you said, the employers really want disclosure. The people who are there to disclose are always scared of disclosing because what are they going to think of me? What's going to happen? And once we open up that conversation, it leads to the ability to help people regulate their emotions and to have a happier, more fulfilling work life.
Thank you, Martin. It just reminds me of something that we've been thinking about doing, and engaging employers to see whether they would perhaps put up something openly on their website, that we encourage openness and what sort of accommodations we might be able to provide for individuals who might have diverse needs. So I think that the fear that potential candidates might have is that it would be seen poorly and they're going to just throw away their application, right? But in fact, if employers and organizations can encourage that, this openness and as well as that community with those who are diverse, maybe just a message on the website, maybe just an indication, that might help change things a little, because I think openness is absolutely necessary. And I've just been told that I've got to watch my time. It's so difficult when we're having such a good conversation, right? But I have questions from the audience, and I feel obligated to ask them so that you guys get the answers. All right, there's a part 2 to that question, actually. So the question about whether the condition should be revealed to mitigate his struggles. There's a part 2. Presently, he told us he wants to go overseas for studies. He's 24. Will it be of any benefit if his condition is made known at the time of the application? And I gather we would say yes. Are you going to say no?
No, I'm going to speak loudly. Yeah, I'm going to say yes. But something that we heard yesterday. So there was the international understanding of dyslexia. This is fascinating. I did another project, one of my pet projects, something I led called the Dyslexia Compass. And the Dyslexia Compass was there to find out why there are different numbers of dyslexics in different countries. Or rather, why dyslexia is measured differently in different countries, therefore giving us different numbers. And one of the things is that dyslexia is understood differently. As we saw earlier, the European Dyslexia Association, International Dyslexia Association, Dyslexia Association of Singapore, the British Dyslexia Association, they define dyslexia differently. They assess for dyslexia differently. And what happens, this is really interesting, is when you go from one country to another, or sometimes even within one country, if it's a federal state like Germany or something, when you move, different people will understand your dyslexia differently. And there have been cases where people have moved from one state in America to another state in America, or one country in Europe to another country in Europe, where they've actually lost their dyslexia. As somebody said, it might have been you said, you're cured.
Yes, so we were talking about this yesterday, and when he said this, I said, the cure is migration.
Yeah. And so I do think it's really important to disclose it, but I also think it's really important to know what it means. So in Britain, when you get your diagnostic assessment, you'll get one of two things. You'll either get something that's meaningless, sort of, you're dyslexic, go away with this piece of paper, and it doesn't tell you anything. Or you'll get a massive wad of scientific explanations about phonological decoding and the Wechsler scale, and you think, what's this mean? And it's difficult to use either of these things to explain to other people what your dyslexia means to you. Because a lot of the time when we talk about dyslexia is, and we've used this word a few times, and it's a really useful word to look at, it's a label. Now, a label is something that people apply to you. And different people put this label on you, and they understand you according to that label. And again, I'm going to go back to a theme I talked about earlier on. This is an act of power, in a way, and it's an act of closing a conversation down. When we label something, we don't need to know any more about it. And then we have our preconceptions of what that means. So what we need to do is listen to each other and ask to be listened to, rather than ask to be labeled. And that's something which I would advocate for all the time.
At 24, I suppose it's just an undergrad study. I guess it depends on how competitive that position is and how confident you are to make it with or without disclosing your condition. We have known of an adult ADHDer after she took up the A-star scholarship to do her PhD. Before that, she wasn't diagnosed. She didn't know that she had that condition. Obviously, she's high functioning. But after she took up the PhD scholarship, she just crashed. She just couldn't cope with the rigor of the PhD work. And in the end, she had to be admitted to IMH, get the diagnosis so that she can buy herself out of the bond. So it's a lot of heavy lifting work after that. So you got to look at the implications behind whether you know of your condition and you don't declare, or you don't even know of a condition but you suspect that you have a condition. So there are multiple ways of looking at it. But if it's just an undergrad degree, you are high functioning, you have been coping well throughout mainstream schools, you are afraid that you will lose that spot in that university that you're really desiring to go, then perhaps you have some leeway of sort. Yeah, but like I said, if you truly have needs and deficits, it's going to surface at some point. So you need to be aware of that, because you don't want to pay back the consequences in a harder way eventually.
True, sure.
You're taking up something that you can't cope.
Exactly. And it just reminds me of some of our experiences here. And most institutes of higher learning will have a diverse learner policy of some kind, some form of accommodation. And often we encourage our students to reach out, acknowledge, disclose, and seek that accommodation. We have to demand it sometimes, but we do. We think it is important. And most organizations, or even in this case, universities, should have that support available. If they don't, then again, it's something we need to talk about. And I was sharing with you both earlier about an experience that was shared with me about a student in one of our top universities in Singapore who actually left the program, undergraduate degree, left the program because he felt he had overreached, but he had not disclosed his issues. So in general, I think it's better to be open, to share, and to actually advocate, speak up, and get the support, demand it almost, because it's not a case of overreaching, it's not a case of I'm not able to do it, it's a case of ensuring the ways through which I am able to demonstrate my ability are provided to me.
Yeah, exactly, because even formal institutions will give you a lot of leeway. Like even in poly, right, they have this system of sending parents the attendance sheet of your child. They will tell you that if you don't meet a 75% mark, you will be marked fail for that subject. But that's on paper. So if the lecturer knows that you have some sort of needs, that then they will be able to bend that rule a little bit more. You know, same for, you know, being on time, you know, so on and so forth. So that kind of support is truly helpful.
Yes.
Otherwise, you will be marked and boxed in that same template like anybody else.
Correct.
And that is worse off for you.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
I think one of the key points is at which point do you disclose? Yeah, I think that's an important thing for parents and the young adult to know. For example, for jobs, there's actually no need to disclose beforehand if nothing is required in the application form. I think one of the things that affected all their raised hands is in Singapore, our context is not entirely that is inclusive, like what Frankie is saying, but that they think that employers put it there as in, do you have any prior diagnosed needs or mental health conditions?
Yes, they asked the
Yeah,
question.
and so that is actually more like ethically, actually not allowed. Now in Singapore, HR were not allowed to ask that anymore. So if you see and your child encounters that, please go and report that company. Yeah, so they're not supposed to. So it's actually, that's discriminatory. So it's not a positive part of it, yeah. But yes, so you don't necessarily have to declare at your application, you know, but when, right? So likely after you got the job and then you meet your team. So similarly to saying my strengths and my weaknesses are, or whatever, you do team building, then you find a suitable time to disclose. So similar for university applications, very unlikely they will ask you when you're applying for university. But after you've got in, or actually when you're even applying, you should search about this university's inclusiveness practices, their support services for people with dyslexia, right? Find out as an option in the first place whether it's suitable for your child. But after they've gotten in, then you can possibly request or find out and contact those officers. Yeah, because it shouldn't be an entry or no entry thing. So it's true that if there are people with old, archaic, non-inclusive mentalities manning the applications office, then you don't want to get your son or yourself discriminated against, right? So it's about timing and about how you communicate it, I feel.
Thank you, Tina. Yeah. I really do want to ask this question, if it's okay. 2 questions. One, as caregivers, how do you take care of yourselves? I mean, a lot of us here want to know, right? Yes.
Correct. I think one of the key things is have good, suitable support. Okay, so of course my key supporter is, Frankie, and I'm so glad that we can do it as a couple. I know many couples, sadly, it is becoming so fractious and conflicting that you don't have support even in your marriage. Okay, and that's something that you can work towards. But if that's the case, find at least a few friends, a few good buddies who know your situation, who you can cry to, you can run to anytime you need emotional support. Another thing I would recommend for parents is other parents. So on behalf of like Spark, even for DAS, this year I'm working with them to do a lot more parent support group sessions. Parents supporting parents is the best thing. Okay, you don't know you need it, but you need it. Okay, it's just like when you hear us speak and how much it resonates with you. It's because you hear another parent speak about the things that you're going through, and suddenly it makes you feel like, hey, I'm not alone. And hey, that's not so strange. Like, oh wow, like everything that she said, I've gone through, because it's a parent's voice. And that's the beauty of parents coming together, because you lend each other support, and you cry together, you like catharsis, and you are safe. Because when you share this with relatives, with your own social groups, you often get judged. People give you this kind of look, and then they may give you this kind of parenting talk. Next time, in your WhatsApp, they start sending you all the how to parent well, and they think that you're doing a poor job. Then you feel so judged, and you're like, oh my, then you lose friend circles because of that. Some of your friend circles may be very good and inclusive, but I think generally, people don't understand. So it's very tough. So please find like-minded people to support you. I'll let you say a bit more.
Yeah, I guess support is not just to receive, but also to give. Ironically, when you give, when you reach out, you gain a lot more. Yeah, so if you come into a support group, those that can facilitate and lead, don't shy away. Just keep doing it. Then the community will grow. Then you will find more strength. Then things will become a lot easier. Yeah, so that's the approach that we have been taking. Yeah, and importantly, back to what I shared earlier on, to give yourself more margin. Yeah, don't take on too much, too soon, at the expense of being able to care for all the various things in life. Yeah, like a child's life is not just about school. Same thing as a parent's life is not just about work. Yeah, so we need to be able to manage relationships, manage the home front as well as the work front. Yeah, I think if more of us can do that, then we will not carry too much burden and stress beyond how we can cope. Yeah, so that margin is really, really important.
Yes, I mean, with my conversations with people, caregivers particularly, you see they burn the candles on both ends. And yeah, very quickly they lose whatever makes them themselves, it's their unique quality gets missing, and it becomes so focused on just the issues that are in front of us, which tend to be problems. Martin, any thoughts about caregivers and what we can do to look after ourselves?
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to add anything much to what these two said, to be honest with you. These two are the role models of caregivers. I'm not, and I wouldn't want to speak for people like that.
Okay,
so
but then let me ask you this question, and it's got to be the final one, because otherwise I think Deborah will kick me out. Yeah, look at that. All right, very soon the cane's gonna come, and she's gonna drag me out off stage. Yeah. All right. So this question, I'm opening it up to all three of you. Someone asked, I'd like to know more about suicidal ideation and how it can be overcome. So let's focus about how it can be overcome.
Okay, so I mentioned earlier, we all know the links between dyslexia and suicide. For those of you who don't, your chances of attempting self-harm are 85% higher if you're dyslexic. Your chances of attempting suicide are about 42% raised. if you're dyslexic. These are massive numbers, massive numbers. We heard earlier on about somebody whose child had suicidal ideation. And in fact, I mean, I'm going to open up with you. It's really easy, it's really interesting. And when I say this, I want you to understand this in the way in which I mean it. I have gone through moments of self-harm, and self-harm is not necessarily cutting yourself. This is the obvious thing that people think of when they hear self-harm. It's other things. So for me, it's come in different forms. It's come in forms of rejecting love, for instance, rejecting relationships. It's come in the form of alcohol and substance abuse. It's come in the form of people wouldn't know where I was. And they'd realize that I'd gone off to sleep in a public toilet cubicle for 3 or 4 days because that's what I thought I deserved. And one of the interesting things about suicidal ideation, when we hear about it, it's not simply one thing. There is hardly a day goes by in my life that I don't fantasize about blowing my own brains out. Now, I say this really seriously, that I want you to understand it the way I mean it. This, to me, feels almost like a release of pressure. I don't want to blow my brains out. I have no intention of doing it, and I don't think it's going to happen. In fact, I'm fairly certain it's not going to happen. But those fantasies that come back about shoving the gun in my face and pulling the trigger every single day, it feels almost like a release of that pressure that had led previously. And so one of the things is that we need to listen to what it means in different people, because it does mean very different things in different people. A very simple trick, by the way, to help remediate against the emotional trauma is to help people understand emotional trauma. We know something, has anyone ever heard of the wheel of emotions? Wheels of emotions are really useful because what they do is they help you pinpoint and understand the emotions you're going through, and then it helps you deal with these emotions more. But I think more importantly, as these two people said very eloquently, that support network, that people can listen to you and affirm you, and then that ability to affirm other people as well, is such a powerful thing. It's engaging and it's empowering. This notion of being disempowered is something that those of us with dyslexia have gone through our entire lives. And the notion of taking away that disempowerment to empower others is really, really important. And that notion of being listened to. And for it to be okay, to be not okay, is so important. I don't know what you'd think to that.
Thanks for sharing that, Martin. We experienced that with John as well. There are periods of time in his life that he will share with us that almost every day during that period, he feels like harming himself. And what he told us that he wouldn't jump because he's afraid of the pain. Yeah. In fact, just last night, he texted us very late at night before we went to bed. We only saw the message this morning telling us that he's very anxious now, but don't worry, I'm not going to hurt myself. You know, so he has a chat group with us that he can express himself. Sometimes he can't talk, he can text. Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's the question, right, was phrased like, can you read it again about, it's like, how do you resolve, how do you stop?
Yes, how do you overcome?
Yeah, so I was just sharing earlier that, I do some work also besides special needs, overlapping. I do support for parents whose children have mental health struggles. So we also have a separate support group for that. You'll be amazed how overlapping it is because there are a lot that are later diagnosed ADHD and ASD young people inside that chat, meet the parents of the young people. And I've interacted with mentors who have gone on to now serve, in the suicide prevention area. And they often share that this is something that if they have, they carry with them and it comes up again and again and again. Okay, so let's not think that it's something to be quickly resolved. But one of the key things is to equip yourself, as whether you're a caregiver or whether you're a parent or even anyone actually of us in Singapore. Did you receive the statistics like last week on your WhatsApp? Singapore is the highest rate of suicide in the world. Yeah, I think a while back we had all the breakdown of different ages, but just last week or 2 weeks ago, because I'm in all these chats, right? So I received this. So any one of us could know someone that is going through and having suicide ideation, and it could be adults too, okay, not just young people. There is an organization called Caring for Life that runs a very short 4-hour training online or in person to equip peers, like any one of us, to be a peer support. So it's helpful for you if you're a parent and your child or teenager, a teenage son or daughter has that, because then you would know how to, the questions to ask, the kind of things that you should go through. Yeah, so please equip yourself, because one of the key things is we don't know what to do. When someone has any, says it, we are lost and we're stumped and we don't really know what to do, and often we end up sending them to specialists, which may not be what they need at that point, because especially for young people, it can be the trigger. Like, you don't understand, you're always trying to solve my problem, and they may not want to talk to a stranger. Yeah, so equip ourselves, because in Singapore, like I said, it's so high and it's often very hidden, and that's the more scary one. So the fact that if your child has it and actually please heave a sigh of relief, because the fact that they're already asking for help, they're willing for you to know. But the key is don't panic. If you panic or you react in a way that pushes them, that overwhelms them, then they're always going to say, oh dear, I cannot tell mom or dad because they're going to freak out, so I better keep quiet. But it doesn't make the problem in them go away. Yeah, so they really do need support. There are many avenues for support for young people, for children, but we need to know of it so that we're equipped to support them.
Thank you, Gina. So in addition to the helplines, and there are quite a few reading materials, I think, in the MSF websites, and in addition to that, it's about us knowing so that we can help
reach out
and support. Well, I'm looking out for Deborah to see whether she's got the cane. Okay. Martin, I do want to ask you a final question, all right? If not dyslexia, difficulty with words, what do you suggest we call it? If it was written on your post-it pad, what would it be? My chance, right?
Actually, this is a really interesting question. I've been struggling with this question for years and asking lots and lots of people. And I've heard lots of people come up with really interesting answers. One of the ones that stuck with me, but we can't use it, and I'll explain why in a second, was right-brainer. I love this idea of right-brainers. It's a great phrase. I mean, it's misleading, of course. Neurologically, it's misleading. Yes. But it's a nice way of putting it. I personally, I wonder, and it's a really interesting question, I wonder whether notions such as dyslexia and ADHD and autism and dysgraphia and dyslalia and dyspraxia and dyscalculia, etc., 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 I wonder whether these words will soon disappear. 50, 100 years ago, we used to use certain words to describe certain people that we would never use now. We would never dream of using them now. And I see that the more research there is, the more we realize that on the one hand, it's highly unlikely that you are purely dyslexic. You're dyslexic and. And on the other hand, when we talk about dyslexia, this word is filled with all sorts of different nuance, and you can be this kind of dyslexic or that kind of dyslexic. You can have, your dyslexia might present in this way or in that way or in different ways. And so what we see is that the boundaries of dyslexia are themselves kind of organic and they morph. And when you're dyslexic, you're not simply dyslexic. You're dyslexic and you have dyscalculia and you're dyspraxic and you're a woman and you're an older woman or a younger woman or you're a Singaporean woman or you're and all of these things, these all intersect to the point where it might well be that as we develop and as our ways of expressing things develop, the words such as dyslexia start to become a little bit old-fashioned, and we just look at people as human beings.
Thank you, Martin. Well, he's been thinking about it for years, so you guys don't feel bad, if it's going to take you a bit longer to figure that one out. Okay, I have to end. So, we can keep talking, and clearly we can learn a lot from the panelists here, Tina, Frankie, and Martin. So we thank them for sharing their invaluable insights and experiences. Your contributions are crucial, I think, in helping us understand, maybe reframing how we are thinking about things, and especially since the issues that we are dealing with are so multifaceted. I think it really involves a lot of conversations. So to everyone here, I hope you found this session filled with information and inspiration, right, as you leave this conference. And with that, I'm going to hand it over to Hamada.